Thank you very much for really enlightening us. As I told you, only Professor Krueger can do this. With a very short period of time, she covered all global economic terrain. Actually, with her theoretical background and her experience at the World Bank and the IMF, I suppose all with this background, only Anne Krueger can do. Now, since we cover so many areas, and there's so many lessons and policy implications we can take from her presentation. We have the reporters there, and I'm sure the reporters and the participants here from audience will have many questions and comments to be made. But Professor Krueger has to leave about this 8:45, so please make your questions and comments as brief as possible. Just get to the point. Yes. And Deputy Prime Minister.
Excellent talk. You always do that. I have two important issues to talk about with you. One is the Japanese role in the international economy, or even international politics, we might say. Not long ago, Japanese government published their version of the 20th century Japanese economy. Because of aging populations, economic growth, GDP growth will be 1% per year, and because of aging populations, they are not particularly what you call the optimistic about their future about economic well-being, other than saying that like a retired person, because they have so much of the international asset abroad, so they want to be more of a rentier, retired person like that. And that sort of disturbed me, because you know that Japan is the second largest economy, and you mentioned Japan a few times in the past. Best growth of the world has been generated by Japanese economy. Well, Japan never assumed their proper role of international growth in the economy. Abe says he want to change Japanese image. Well, you can change image by sticking in such scenarios, visions. And I don't know how you comment on that. The other one is the demographic changes you mentioned. I'm a lot more disturbed about that, your comment on demographic changes. Look at the U.S. When I was a student in the U.S. population was 22 million. Now it's 300 million, adding 80 million. And birth rate is even going up, all other countries are birth rate is sort of declining. And a country like Korea and Japan I mentioned already, Europe is already also saw that. When this trade economics as well as the international minded people is not, I think, is emphasizing so enough on this labor mobility. I would say population mobility. It's not like old days. Developing country has such a great many talents, great pool of people. Why can't they bring to developing countries, developed countries like the U.S. Korea is also very protective of this immigration issues. So we are also talking about the aging populations. Our productivity wouldn't be catching up enough, so that we are doomed to grow slow in the 21st century. I think it's a whole bunch of baloney. If you are so, parochial-minded person, go ahead, grow, such as slow rate. But all this, it's about time that the first 20 centuries, there must be, huge population growth, the population mobilities, that will not only generate the birth rate growth in developed countries, it's benefiting all, globally, everybody. I challenge your discussion on the aging population and the productive growth. I want to your comment.
Okay. Well, the first time I gave a talk, which is about I think 2 years ago, on the demographics of the aging population, so when there was a Japanese economist in the audience, and when the question time came, he raised his hand. And he said, on our current demographic projections, the last Japanese will die in 802 years. They really have a problem with this, and I agree with you. The immigration could solve part of it. Now, the United States is doing better largely, not entirely, but largely because the U.S. has a lot more immigration. The U.S. birth rate is not rising, but it's not falling as much. And so immigration can do a great deal. On the other hand, it can do it only for 1 or 2 generations at most. Because what's happening, at least in the United States, is once a family has migrated to the United States, within a generation and a half on average, their birth rates are the same as other Americans. So you could postpone it with immigration. And at the moment, given how big the problem looks, postponing is not going to be a very desirable thing to do. But if, in fact, people moving to the United States then have demographic patterns within 2 generations like other Americans, and people moving to Korea do the same thing here and so on, it only buys a temporary and partial solution. Now, even India.
Come on, bring some more then.
Well, the other part of it is that in many of the developing countries, birth rates are falling quite rapidly. Even India, they are now anticipating that they hit their demographic transition 2 decades later, but they still hit it. Birth rates are falling there too. It is, I think, in part, it's a function of higher incomes, and right now, people aren't wanting as many children when their incomes go up. Now, that may change, and in fact, I don't think it will last forever. If people become more valuable, that's fine. But no matter what we do, we're going to have a demographic problem in the sense of financing these older people. We can make it better with more immigration. We can make it better by making the retirement age later. We can make it better by doing other things, finding ways to do more effective, cost-effective delivery of health care. But we're not going to solve it that way. There's still going to be a problem in the gap there, partly because the demographics are coming on us so fast that the rate at which we have to absorb people or do all these other things would be too great. I think that Ken Rogoff calculated at one point that in order for the Japanese to solve their problem through later retirements, people couldn't retire until they were 95. I mean, so many of these problems are really quite extreme. They are not small problems. And anything that can be done on the immigration front, on the postponing the day of retirement front, on increasing participation in the labor force, that can postpone things a few years. And right now, by the way, in Japan, there is some evidence that women's participation is starting to go up. The labor force did not fall last year, or last half year, even though, in fact, the numbers of people in that age group did, because participation rates are going up, and they are working on that front quite hard. So I think there are, my message would be that I agree with you, immigration would help, so will all these other things, but we're going to have to do as much as we can on all those fronts, and there will still be something of a problem. It is not small enough that we can find any one thing that's a quick fix. Now, turning to Japan, as you said, as you're quite correct, they have had a disastrous 10 years. I think there's been a lot of learning in Japan from that. The economy has turned up. They are not out of the woods in some senses, but on the other hand, I think there is much more attention to the kinds of structural and macro reforms because they recognize that they have the demographic problem right there. The postal savings reform in Japan, once it's carried out, is huge. And there are a number of others like that. So I don't read it as being quite as pessimistic as you do. And one of the things that I think is interesting is that even if the United States goes into